Okay. Now, our next guest, many of you probably have heard of him, heard of his work. He's an award-winning author. He's a guest here at the convention. And I'd like to introduce to you now Poul Anderson. Glad to meet you, Mr. Anderson. How are you? Okay, I have to admit, this was thrown at me at the last minute, so why don't we start with the basics, your work. What kind of books do you write? I have to admit, I haven't read many of your works, so I'm a little unfamiliar.
Oh, best known in the science fiction and fantasy fields, though I have done other things.
Okay. What book titles? What are some of the books you've written?
Well, some recent books have been The Boat of a Million Years, The Shield of Time, and a recent collection of shorter stories called The Time Patrol.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay, I've heard of The Time Patrol. I'm familiar with that. How did you first get into writing?
Oh, I used to write more or less for my own amusement for as far back as I can remember. Didn't have any ambition to do it professionally, but while in college, I thought I might as well send something in that I had written, and was quite surprised when it sold, and one thing led to another from there.
Okay. So, about when was this? How many years have you been writing?
Oh, well, professionally, a hard long time ago. My first professional publication was way back in 1947.
Okay. So you've been at this a while. You know the ropes. Since you've started writing, what do you think the evolution has been of the genre, of the science fiction genre? Since your first professional job to now, how do you think the genre itself has progressed?
Oh, well, of course it has increased enormously in popularity and even respectability. It was unthinkable back then that high school and college courses would be taught in it, that sort of thing. By now, of course, science fiction is a fairly important part of the entire publishing scene. And it's probably become more eclectic. A great many things are published these days under the name of science fiction, which would not have been so considered back in the old days. That's by no means a bad development. It gives more variety and so on.
How about the fans, the people that read your work and the other science fiction work? How do you think they've changed over the years?
Well, I would say in a number of ways. With the vast increase in the amount of publication, readership, and so on, fandom is no longer the intimate little group it was. It's sort of diluted into the general readership. There are, of course, still dedicated readers to the extent that you could call them fans, and they do things like put on science fiction conventions, which is great. Their average age has probably increased a good bit. I have no figures on this, but I would guess that whereas the average fan was, back in those days, was in his teens or early 20s, These days, the average might be more like 30, perhaps. And also, and this is a delightful development, it's no longer appropriate to say just he. There were very few women interested in science fiction back then. These days, there are a great many.
Okay. Writing science fiction, I mean, what do you use for inspiration? I mean, it's not like this is a historical novel or something you can just go out and research. What do you use to get the ideas and to move on from there?
Oh, practically anywhere. Science fiction, like all literature, ultimately goes back to the real world. There is no other source. After all fiction is fantasy in the sense that it deals with unreal, invented people, events, and so on. Science fiction just goes one step further, really. And but even then, there's always necessarily some reference to the real world, some inspiration drawn from it. You can't, after all, write convincing characters without a knowledge of people as they actually are, and so on. In addition, though, you can probably what marks science fiction out especially is that so much of its inspiration and the subject matter comes from science itself and technology, which there's almost none of to this day in mainstream fiction. I say nothing against the average general interest book. Of course, many of them are very fine, but you could read the average one and never get any idea that we're living in the middle of not only what some have called the second or even the third industrial revolution, but a complete ongoing revolution in our whole concept of the universe and of the very nature of man.
Of the body of work you've written over the years, what in your opinion is the best thing that you've ever put out? What piece of work that you did pleased you the most?
That is an impossible question to answer. In a way, it's like asking the father of several children who his favorite is. And also, of course, some have been better than others. Quality is bound to vary, but to a considerable extent, it's like comparing apples and oranges. To take two of mine, for example, that have generally been well regarded. There's one called Tau Zero, which is a piece of very hard science fiction. That is to say, I tried as well as I was able to stay strictly within the bounds of what present-day science would consider possible, not necessarily probable, but not physically impossible. And there's a certain amount of mathematics. In fact, the book has sometimes been used as a teaching aid in classes in relativity. On the other hand, another one of mine, pure fantasy, A Midsummer Tempest, takes place in the world of Shakespeare's plays. The characters mostly talk in blank verse, and Oberon and Titania characters in it, and so on. Absolutely nothing to do with science or what reality as we understand it. So how do you compare the two? Well, I just think they're two of my better ones.
Now, I know you've won several awards. You've won the Hugo, or was it the Nebula? In my brief research, you've won a couple of awards in your time.
Yes, several. There's the Hugo that's awarded at the convention essentially by both of the fans, and the Nebula that's awarded by both of the members of the Science Fiction Writers of America. And then there are several other special awards here at this convention this evening, for example. It gave its own special award, which it does every year, for what's considered to be the best original paperback book published in the field. And there are various others.
Okay. What advice would you give to a young writer, just somebody just starting out who wanted to write science fiction or fantasy? What advice would you give them if they came up to you and asked you?
Well, I'm often asked this, and it doesn't matter what they want to write. They may not be interested in that at all. They may want to write here and now works or historical fiction or mystery fiction, or you name it. So I would say mainly, well, stick to it. It's a hard road to hoe. And learn as much as you possibly can. You can't write unless you have something to write about. In other words, you have to know people, you have to know the world. I don't see how anyone in this day and age could be considered educated who doesn't have a reasonable understanding of science. It doesn't matter whether they read science fiction or not.
Okay.
And of course, also, there are very few full-time freelance writers, really. Most writers, including some who are world famous, moonlight at it. So have two strings to your bow.
Okay.
Train for something else. If you're going to college, major in anything that interests you except creative writing.
One last question. Is there anything that you wanted to say to your fans that you maybe never had a chance to say before? This is your big chance for open forum.
Well, essentially, thank you very much for all your interest and kindness over the years. Fans are great people. They're essentially those readers whom the science fiction writer actually meets. A small minority, of course, but most of them you never know about. The fans are the ones you encounter, and by and large, they're great people.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank you very much, Mr. Anderson.
Okay.
Poul Anderson.